Welcome back to the podcast with me, Pete Tigers. I still haven't fished for a bit now, but I'm starting to get the urge to head out and find somewhere fishable. And if you follow my socials, you'll know I'm looking forward to taking my new van on an adventure somewhere. Okay, on to my guest. I've known him a long time now and have fished with him on a couple of occasions, and I even caught a salmon. He's lucky for me. He left South Devon for Scotland, and I'm excited to learn how he settled in and to explore the fishing he now experiences and how it might compare with Devon. I'm pleased to be joined today by Rob Mason. Rob, how are you, my friend? It's great to have you along.
I'm very well, thanks, Pete. And you?
Very well indeed. Thank you. As I said, I'm just fighting off the shack nasties. It's mid-January and I'm getting that urge. I've not been able to fish for grayling since November. And I'm sort of just starting to think about those things just a little bit more. But by and large, I'm doing okay. I'm getting the spring magazine ready. So that's in good shape at the moment. So all is pretty good. But more importantly, how about you? And are you in fishing slumber at the moment? Or do you tend to get out? Do you hang the rods away until springtime? Or I guess up there, actually, it's winter. You start fishing for salmon, don't you?
Yeah. No, I put the rods away. So my last day was probably 14th or 15th of October on the Tay, and then I'm out again beginning of February on the D. And in the meantime, I've my usual thing of selling most of my stock on eBay and buying a load more instead. But yes, I'm. It's not so much slumber; it's just it's housekeeping. It's a different aspect to the fishing, isn't it? Really, but I'm really looking forward to the start of the season.
Good, and you make an interesting point there about selling stuff, because we sort of at these times when we're not fishing or the weather's against us, that we sit and think about, perhaps I should do this year, and that leads to a whole new sea change in purchases or little bits and pieces like that, isn't it? That we suddenly think, well, that might enhance or help my enjoyment by doing this. And then it takes you down a wonderful, wonderful rabbit hole, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. I mean, I wanted to justify buying a new rod. I've got Ross James to build me another double-hander at RJC, and I needed to justify it, so I had to sell a load of old rods and reels. But then having sold all those reels, I needed a new reel, hence why I asked you the other day about the Sage Spey. And then, of course, I needed some Rio metered running line, and so it goes on.
Yeah, I was looking at integrated spey lines just yesterday as well, and thought, well, perhaps I need one of those. And then you end up doing loads of research and try and talk yourself into why you probably need these. So, yeah, I might do something very, very soon. But you mentioned the Tay and you mentioned the D. So for listeners, can you tell us whereabouts you're based?
So I'm in Aberdeenshire. I live about 15 miles north of Aberdeen. Aberdeen is where I work. So my sort of nearest river, if you like, is the Don, but the Dee's very close, the Devon, the Spey. And historically, I fished a lot on the Tay, so I still hanker after going down there from time to time.
And how far is it for the Tay for you to get across there?
It would be about 2 hours to Dunkeld. Yeah.
And what does that mean then from a fishing perspective? Do you take the day or do you take a couple of days? How do you plan those sorts of trips?
So for the Tay, we tend to go down for a few days. So we have a favourite cottage, which is very close to, if you know the Tay, it's sort of the junction of the Tummel and the Upper Tay. So we take a cottage near there, so it's very handy for Kinnaird, which is where I've done a lot of fishing over the years. So that's a sort of favoured spot if we want to go further away.
And I sort of know the Devon pretty well, right at the bottom at Banff there, and have fished that for many, many years. Do you get to go fish there from time to time?
So I haven't fished the lower beats. I've got a very nice upper middle beat that I go to. I sort of discovered it about 2 years ago. It seems lightly fished, but if you look, they've got record books going back years, and it used to be absolutely fantastic. So I've got this thing about trying to make that my go-to place. It's about half an hour, 40 minutes drive, so it's not too bad to get to, but it's just lovely water. It's kind of got that almost Highland stream appeal to it. It's just outside that, the Devon Valley. If you go slightly higher up from Banff, you hit this beautiful valley, and it's just starting to open out, and it looks like a freestone river. It's just lovely.
And Emma and I used to do that drive from Devon all the way up to Banff, and I think it's about 11 hours. And I guess that's slightly different for you now that it's just half an hour away and much easier and much more accessible.
Yeah, it's lovely. And the number of times I've done that drive, usually stopping overnight. I was always lucky, still am lucky. My mum and dad lived in Cheshire with my sister nearby as well, so we always had somewhere to break the journey. But yeah, if you do it in one hard slog, it's a good way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm getting, well, listeners will certainly, I know, but are getting a sense that we're sort of circling around salmon at the moment. And for people listening, how would you sort of explain what salmon fishing means to you?
It's very difficult to put it into words, really. I mean, I'm not an exclusively aligned to salmon. I do fish for trout occasionally and sea trout as well, but it's just something that's got under my skin and has been there for a very long time. And it's something I enjoy, and at times can be slightly possessed by, or consumed by. I'm not a prolific salmon fisherman by any means. I have far more blank days than I have successful days. But when I'm fishing, I'm usually happy and usually content. I can not think of very many days when I've been salmon fishing when I've been unhappy. I've fished for a week at a time and not caught a single fish and gone away thinking I've had a great time.
Yes, it does transcend to a higher level from there. And so you may be fishing for quite some time. The line hasn't been tight for a little while, but how would you explain that when that line does come to life, that moment?
It's that thing, isn't it? People say, what's the most exciting thing about salmon fishing? Is it the initial hookup? Is it when you get the net under the fish? But for me, it is when you get the line tighten and the rod bend. And I had a fantastic experience on the Tay last year. I didn't land the fish, but I hooked what would probably have been the fish of my lifetime. It took the fly, it tore off, it jumped. I saw this huge flank, and then it was gone. But I wasn't disappointed. I was just in awe of this fish. I think I'd have been disappointed if after 20 minutes it had come off. But it was never meant to be. But that thrill of having that fish surge away is great. It's also nerve-wracking, isn't it, when after about 2 seconds they start nodding their head and you think, oh no, this one's going to come off. But no, it's a very, very thrilling sensation. And if you're lucky enough to land a fish, it carries on all the way through the fight. And the feeling when you release the fish back into the water is I'm not a drug taker, obviously, but I can imagine it must be better than a lot of illegal substances.
Yeah, there must be something in there, mustn't there, that it does trigger something primeval. But also you mention about that fish that didn't stick and dealing with loss. And there will be people listening. And I was watching something, can't remember where it was, the other day on TV. It was on fishing TV. And I'd signed up for that. And somebody kept losing fish and were throwing their rods around and everything along those sorts of lines. It was in Canada. It was Iceland. It was in Iceland. And they had a load of fish to go at, And it was interesting to see that. And I know sometimes we've had issues where we lose a fish and we beat ourselves up about it or try and understand why we've done it. But I've learned from Emma as well that dealing with loss is absolutely fine. And she just genuinely doesn't care. And that's certainly rubbed off on me the last few years. And when that happens, and I lost a springer on the tour 3, possibly 4 years ago now, and I was okay about it actually. It was
Yeah.
for it, and I didn't mind. And do you think we do? And I often talk about this in the podcast. Do you think we move to a different level, perhaps as we get older, or perhaps as we do a fair bit of fishing and perhaps understand it a little bit more deeply, that we don't mind if that fish does come astray?
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that you've got to play the averages, haven't you? I mean, I went through a long spell of not losing fish, and this season has basically gone into two parts. The first part, I hooked and landed fish, and the second part was I hooked and lost fish, and it all kind of evens itself out. So I don't get too hung up on it. I've lost fish at the net. And yes, that's a bit galling, but it's not the be all and end all. I mean, I did once have a spell. I went fishing on the South Esk, night fishing for sea trout, and I lost fish after fish after fish. And the guys I was fishing with were giving me flies to see if my hooks weren't sharp enough and things like this. And I did eventually land, ironically enough, a salmon at night rather than a sea trout, but that was fine. I put to the back of my mind the fact that I'd lost half a dozen fish. They just kept falling off. So I don't worry about it. I don't blame myself. I don't blame my tackle. It's just what happens. I blame the fish.
Yeah, it's part of the deal, isn't it? And yeah, and we're going to put them back, so it doesn't really matter from that point of view. And I'm not fussed about getting likes for a fish, or and again, I'll pop something out, but it's about a whole lot more. And again, I come back to Emma, and because you've mentioned the Devon, that's in my mind. And her first visit there, and her first salmon came from the Devon. And I remember her saying that she so enjoyed the spey casting and stringing together a number of spey casts. Are you a spey caster, and do you take great pleasure from that?
I am a spey caster. Yeah, I mean, I do take pleasure. I always wish I could be better, particularly off my left shoulder, which is particularly weak. And in fact, I did say to myself at the end of the season last that I would go and get some help with it, but we've had so much on that I just haven't had time to do it. But yeah, I mean, I'm not a master craftsman or technician, but I do enjoy sending out a good line, I've got to say.
Yeah, there's something very pleasing about it. And I was thinking about this morning, because having been in the instructing camp and now more of a civilian angler, it actually doesn't matter, does it? It doesn't matter unless it's your peers that are thinking about it. If you stuff a cast, you're not taking an exam or anything, so it doesn't really matter. And I think we're probably emphasising or putting too much pressure on ourselves because we see stuff and think, well, it's got to be like that. But it really doesn't matter. Everyone stuffs a cast, and it doesn't matter if that doesn't all go to plan. And so, yeah, I think the mantra for me is trying to enjoy it no matter what, isn't it? And it doesn't matter if everything isn't perfect.
And fish within your own abilities as well. I think that's key. If you, and we all do it, don't we? As we think we're getting better and we're getting into the groove, we tear off another 5 yards of line, but it always goes to pot. So keep within your own limitations and enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I wanted to understand a little bit more about the fishing up there. And you said you'd found a little beat of the Devon that you were fishing, and I'm not, obviously, I don't want you to name it or anything, but I wanted to understand a little bit, because as a visitor up there, I tend to come up for 3, 4, 5, 6 days. And if you're local, does that mean you're able to get access to some of these beats, or are there syndicates? Are there clubs? Is there day ticket water? How does it work?
So there's everything really. I mean, I've not joined an angling association, but there are angling associations on the Dee and Don and Spey, and I was here 20 years ago as well or over 20 years ago as a junior doctor, and there was a big waiting list to join the Aberdeen and District Angling Association. But I don't know that there is a waiting list at all now, so it's not difficult to get on. And one of my colleagues is a member and enjoys the fishing greatly. But I must admit, I prefer to take day tickets. Day tickets are very easy to come by. Fish Pal has just changed the whole landscape, really, of fishing. So, again, 25 years ago, if I was fishing up here, it would be more difficult to get a day ticket. But pretty much everywhere you can get on now. It's just a question of where you set your limit in terms of price. There are some syndicates, but what I endeavoured to do when I moved up about 2.5 years ago. What I endeavoured to do was to explore, to get to know places, and find out where I want to be. My problem is I want to be everywhere. So I want to be on that classic middle D beat. I want to be on the Devon. So it's difficult to sort of nail down quite where I want to settle. I think the Devon probably, it's a more modest stream, but it has a good run of fish potentially. But yeah, there's so much fishing available. I mean, I literally could walk to my nearest fishing, which is a fishing club in Kintore on the River Don. I could join there, but I don't think it's the sort of fishing that's for me, really. I might be wrong, but I get the impression most of it's spinning water. The lower reaches of the Don aren't quite as interesting for me as a fly fisherman as the middle and upper reaches.
You made some interesting points about the access to fishing clubs, and now I think it was the Aberdeen club that you mentioned is easier to get into. Do you read anything into that? Is that declining numbers of anglers? Is it something to do with the fish runs? Is it a combination of everything?
I think it's probably a combination of everything. I think also it is catch and release. I think there were a lot of older members of the angling fraternity who gave up fishing because of catch and release. I think most people, myself included, have seen the light in that regard and put everything back. But I think it did deter a lot of people. But no, the fish numbers, and unlike you and I, Pete, a lot of people are quite fickle. And if you have a few bad years, they start selling their tackle and say they're giving up, or they're going to take up golf or reservoir fishing. And then what did we have last summer? We had the best run of grilse we've had in 20 years. And they'll all be back on eBay buying their gear back again. But I think it's the same everywhere. I still kind of keep tabs on the upper Tean where I used to fish in Devon. And there was a waiting list when I joined there 20 years ago, and there isn't a waiting list anymore. Same on the Dart. So I think it's just a sign of the times.
Yeah, and I guess you're hoovering up that fishing tackle on eBay as well then when it appears.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating what you say about the Tean as well, that, you know, we've talked about it on here, and you may well have listened to that. And shout out to Harry Chance for what he's doing pretty much on his own to keep everything going there as well. I spoke to him just the other day, and he's doing most of it himself because he believes in the history of that club, and it's continuing its history as well. And also he's a fishing guide, so if you're on Dartmoor, go speak to Harry as well, who we've had on there. He's just such a good, energetic person to have behind these things. And it's wonderful to hear about that grilse run as well, because I was going to ask you, although it's a small sample size, that 2.5 years, had you noticed or detected anything? But clearly, I guess you probably have.
Yeah, I mean, I did. Certainly, last year was a pretty good run by recent trends on the Devon as well, actually, but not to my rod. I made a big mistake last year. I plan most of my fishing ahead. I don't need to, but I plan most of it ahead because it's just the way I am. I like to know what I'm doing. So every year I say to myself, right, this is going to be the year of the spring fish. So I book up spring fishing like it's going out of fashion. And by the time I get to June, I'm absolutely exhausted and need a rest. So I missed out big time last year. But obviously, after having a good grouse run last year, there will be a good spring run this year. So I'll be fine.
You best buy something just in case, though, to make sure you're completely covered, whatever
Yeah.
it may be. And also, then, you say you've lived up that neck of the woods before. Was it easy to settle in or settle back in? I guess in some respects for you.
Um, yes, it was. It was quite straightforward, really. I went back to work in a hospital. I'm a urologist. I work for the NHS. And I went back to a hospital where I worked as a trainee, and it was incredible how nothing had changed. It's quite depressing, really. Nothing had changed in 20 odd years. There was quite a lot of people that I remembered, and they remembered me. And my colleagues I kind of knew anyway, because we just, it's a fairly small world. So that made it easy for me. And Gemma and I rented a house in Stonehaven. So we were initially south of Aberdeen, and we just settled in really nicely, and we just enjoyed everything so much. The people, the, countryside, it was just brilliant. Yeah, so really good. And then the fishing obviously has been the icing on the cake for me.
Perfect. What is it about doctors and fishing then? Because I know quite often if you end up going fishing somewhere or other, there's usually a doctor in the party somewhere or other. And I know a couple of years back I got shingles, and there happened to be a doctor who diagnosed it for me, which was fantastic. But do you detect, is there a reason why that may be the case?
I don't know, but you're absolutely right. I mean, certainly I can be in the operating theatre coffee room and have a chat with somebody about fishing. There's always somebody in there who's a fisherman. I don't know why precisely. I think the reputation to the general public is that we're all out playing golf. I think there are a lot of golfers amongst doctors, but yeah, there are a lot of fishermen. I don't know why. Don't know.
And I'd love to also understand about the mental health aspects of fishing. Do you detect that, and do you detect it yourself? Because obviously your job is incredibly stressful, but do you feel yourself that when you're on the river making a cast and the flies coming round, that makes a real difference to your well-being?
Yes, without question. I mean, I like fishing on my own quite a lot. It's one of the things, I'm more than likely to be fishing on my own rather than in company. And I do enjoy it because it just gives me headspace, time to think, process things. But also, you can kind of do that at the same time. Salmon fishing is, let's face it, is easy. You've got plenty of thinking time while it's your salmon fishing. So, but it is definitely very good, and I think it wouldn't be if your attitude was that you had a God-given right to go and catch fish, and why is the water so low, and who put that rock there, and if you're just happy to accept things as they are, then it is a relaxing, de-stressing pastime.
And there was talk about fishing being administered on the NHS. Did anything come of that, or do you think something might come of it? Given the background where we've had the TV program, Paul and Bob's program that has done great for fishing for the general public. Do you think that has sort of died out, that story? Was it true, or were you aware of it being true?
I wasn't aware of it being true. I could certainly see why it it would have a place. But like everything, it's just resources, isn't it? It's just who's going to spend money on sending people fishing when, if in the sort of psychological health field, there's not enough people to help you from a sort of practitioner point of view. They'd probably see the resource would be better spent employing people. But I honestly don't know. I know from speaking to people who live in Belgium that things like that are available for mental health reasons, not necessarily fishing, but other sort of relaxation type pastimes. But I'm not aware that it's happened here. It'd be good.
Yeah, absolutely. And so many people talk about it, and we all feel it, don't we, when we're on,
We do.
either consciously or perhaps not immediately, that you come back refreshed, you come back balanced and ready to tackle anything that's thrown in front of us. So yeah, there is something to be said about it. But like you've mentioned, golf and many other pastimes as well, cycling as well. I'm sure there's lots of other things as well that may help people with as well. So I guess if we're all out there doing these things, all the better we are for it. So you've mentioned the Don, you mentioned the Devon, and you've mentioned that you don't fish exclusively for salmon. So I guess we got to come on to the trout. And how does that, do you get to do that very often? And have you had some exciting experiences on that front?
So I have had some really good experiences with that. So when I was in Devon, I happened to meet a lovely man, and he's still one of my great friends, Roy Robinson of Newton Abbot, who introduced me to the idea of going to Assynt. And in fact, I didn't go on my own. I went with him. So we went up there and had some great times. We did some salmon fishing, and I must say I had 2 fish off the Cacaigue, which was fantastic, 2 salmon. But we did some trout fishing on the locks there, and I really enjoyed it. I wanted to do it again, and he's a real regular. He goes up 3 times a year to Assynt, but he also goes to Orkney, and him and Claire and Gemma and I get on really well. So they invited us to go to Orkney, and we had a week up there a few years back. And Roy and I spent most of the time fishing, and the trout fishing there was just unbelievable. We had such a good time. It was a style of fishing that I really liked, and I can kind of make it seem similar to fishing for salmon. Rather than taking a step down, you're in a drifting boat, obviously going faster than a step down every cast. You're dibbling. You're doing all of these things. You're not fishing, you're not sight fishing like you would be on the river. But you can, or your guide would know from the topography where the fish are likely to be. And so you have quiet spells and absolute flurries of excitement. And the fish were so hard fighting. A pound was a sort of a good fish, but probably actually the last time we went last year was about a pound was the average. Big fish would be about 2 pounds, but they go like absolute steam trains. Double hookups. I had 2 consecutive double hookups and landed all the fish, and it's just incredible. We went in July. It feels like March. It's blowing a hoolie. Full winter gear on, beanie hat, you name it. But I, couldn't beat it. So that's my idea of trout fishing. But it is really because I've never really been river trout fishing. I can fish downstream nymph and stuff like that, and streamers. That's easy. That's no bother at all. But dry fly is a closed book to me. I need somebody to show me.
Well, I'm sure there'll be somebody listening that might be able to help you with that. And those rivers, I mention those two in particular because they're kind of legendary early season rivers for rising trout, just brief hatches of large dark olives and rising trout. And yeah, I think you've got something on your doorstep you might want to explore
Indeed.
a little bit more. But I kind of understand the lock thing, and funnily enough, somebody mentioned the limestone locks of Durness, and I remember watching Paul Young fish them many, many years ago, and they looked absolutely amazing. The fish looked like chalk stream fish. It just looked a fabulous place. And as in, we've had Stuart Yates on the podcast as well, and I think Jailer's written about fishing up there as well, and some of those locks with big fish in, big fish. And it does sound fascinating to me, that whole concept. And I get the impression that you could go fish one lock in the morning and then go head somewhere else in the afternoon too.
Yes, absolutely. As you could fish 3 or 4, and I'm not sure, but I have a feeling that we'll probably Gemma and I head out to South Uist in the late spring if we can get things together. We got slight issues at home that might stop that. Gemma's mum and dad moved up with us last year, so things aren't quite so easy as they were to go away. But one of the things we'd like to do is go to South Uist, and I do like the idea of just casting, walking to the next lock, having a cast, and that's the sort of environment you can do it in. And you can in Assynt as well, I'm sure. All my fishing to date has been in a boat rather than from the bank. But maybe I'll end up climbing up hills and fishing little hill locks halfway up the mountain. Have to learn how to read a compass first.
That might be a good thing to do, certainly. And there's the hotel that you stay in and you can fish the rivers, and there's a lock system, and you write your name in a book. I can't remember the name of it now, but I know Dave goes up there and stays every now and again. Would you know where I mean? It's quite famous. Scowry, that's it.
Yeah. So Scowry is a place that I'd certainly like to spend some time at, and that's I mean, my friend Roy has been there many times, been board master, etc., and tells me that the fishing from there is just incredible. Yeah,
so many places. I usually say so many rivers, so little time, but it sounds like so many locks, so little time as well.
Yes.
There's much to get stuck into. But since you've been in Scotland, how have you sensed the fishing culture? Because I think about, again, when I'm up there and you'll see cars with rod racks on them. The only other place I see that from time to time, particularly Mayfly, is Stockbridge. But do you get the sense there is, and are you involved? Is there a fishing community as such that people are in touch with each other and around a particular tackle shop, say?
Certainly, it's quite a good place to go to Summers Fishing Tackle Shop in Aberdeen and chew the fat with the guys who work there. And they've obviously got their fingers on the pulse because it's a bit of a hotbed for sales as well as sharing information and gossip. I think nowadays most of it's on social media, isn't it? I'm not a big social media user. I've got an Instagram account, but I'm not on Facebook. I think most things happen on Facebook, so I'm kind of fairly closed to a lot of it. So I just pick up what I can. But you're right. You're driving around. You see a lot of rod racks if you're driving up and down the North Deeside Road or around the Devon and stuff. And that gives you a slightly warm glow. Even if you're not fishing, you almost feel like waving.
I know exactly what you mean about that. And I used to, even wherever I am now, that I look, if I'm near a river or there's some there might be some locks if I'm in Scotland that you see a car parked up and you think, perhaps they're like me. Perhaps they're doing
Yeah,
stuff to do. And like you say, the rod rack thing, there should be a salute or something so
there
that
should be a salute. Yes.
you understand and you know exactly what you mean. But I wanted to touch on the social media thing a little bit, if that's okay with you, because you say you keep a low profile. And, I'm thinking about recently, I think I read or heard that, when your phone goes ping, it's like a dopamine thing. And I look at social media and I worry sometimes about people having to post and panicking and not about post. Do you worry that people put themselves, we'll talk about it in a fishing context because that's nice and easy, but do you think they put themselves sometimes under too much pressure with these things and worry that they've got to be involved with it, they've got to be posting, they've got to be part of this?
I think so. Yes, I think there's a sort of need to sort of justify yourself almost um, with social media, and it has become the norm that, I mean, not for everybody, but some people just need to post about their life constantly. I don't see it on Facebook, but I hear about it, and the thing about taking a photograph when you catch a fish. Um, I I can't. I mean, I just can't do it because I'm just thinking about I've got to get the fish back, and I don't want to start faffing around getting the fish to pose while I get everything in the right direction. So the pictures I take when I catch a fish tend to be just either the head or the tail, or it's all blurred. And I mean, yeah, it's not the be all and end all, is it? But there you go. Having said that, I've got a very nice picture framed on my mantelpiece of a nice fish I caught on the Tay about 15 years ago. But, it was just one of those times when I was able to get a decent shot.
Salmon are particularly, they're so photogenic, but they are particular. Well, I haven't caught one. Well, I caught some last year, but I didn't post anything about it until probably November. I think it was November or December. And I thought, and I caught another one that I said to him, I don't want a photo. You and I have seen it. Absolutely
Yeah,
fine. That's enough for me. And I'm trying hard to, it's not for me to say, and people enjoy sharing these things, but I do worry about the pressure people put themselves on, and just in a day hangs on whether you get that magic money shot or not. And I've had my daughter bought me a stand for my phone, and I caught a nice trout on the tour, and my dog's poking his head in, but I was trying to set the camera on
yeah,
timer, so the fish was in the water, lifted it up, but it looks all right. The fish is about an inch above the water, but because of the way the stand's set, it looks. I'm gurning because I've missed the timer, and it was such a terrible experience that I haven't gone to
yeah,
it since, and thought, well, that's absolutely fine. And yeah,
yeah,
so I think the tail of a salmon is really beautiful, and I've spent on the rare occasions trying to get photos of those and just say, well, that's enough. It doesn't have to be, although that bright silver bullet, but it's kind of nice to, if you get the opportunity to do it. But like you say, the important thing is to get the fish back, isn't it? And keep it in the water.
yeah. Yeah, there are some nice pictures out there, aren't there? Like you say, tails and gills, and um, just the interesting colours, particularly in the autumn. The colours you get are stunning, um, and sometimes it's better to focus on those than the whole fish at that time of the year because they tend to be ugly brutes. But yeah, I'm not too hung up on photographs. If somebody's there to take a picture of me, then that's a different matter altogether because you can kind of have more control over what's going on then.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on a little bit. And what I wanted to ask first was, I, of course, know you from Devon, but does Scotland feel like home now? Is that where you're settled?
For sure, yes, yeah. As I said, I was lucky enough to spend 6 years up here in the late '90s, early 2000s, and I've always come back. So I've always taken holidays here. Um, Through work, I had an excuse to come back professionally on regular occasions, and I always fished when I was doing college duties, I would always tag on a day or two's fishing as well. But no, it definitely feels like home, and there won't be any going back. No.
So let's take you back down to Devon just a little bit, because we fished the Tor and the Tamar together. And how do they compare from a fishing standpoint? And again, I'd love to come back to that culture in comparison to what you're seeing, because I'm thinking about the rod racks that you mentioned on top of pickup trucks or cars or whatever. How is the comparison and from what you've done previously down in Devon?
Yeah, so obviously I left Scotland to go down to Devon. So I was in fact, I'd spent the last two or 3 years of my training in Edinburgh. So I used to fish the Tweed a lot. So I went from the Tweed to thinking, right, where am I going to fish? Because I need a nice big river I can open up my arms and cast 30 yards across the stream. But there weren't many opportunities. I met briefly, actually, sadly he died not long after, Roddy Ray, who you might know or have known. And he had some fishing on the Exe. So I joined his little syndicate on the Exe. But at the same time, he was also closely associated with the Upper Tean. So I ended up on the Upper Tean. And of course, I've gone from fishing estate water on the Tweed to joining, first as a trout member, a fishing club. And I did enjoy it. They were super friendly, really helpful. If I was to shout out anybody, it would be Richard Jackson, who was really, really helpful. I used to have many a good evening and night time with him on the sea trout front. Mike Weaver, of course, as well, was a real gentleman. So I really enjoyed it. And yeah, that was just, I've never had that sort of club camaraderie that I had, compared to here. It's you get to know people if you fish in estate water often enough, but you're just a guest, aren't you, really? It's a bit different. So if I was to say I missed anything, it would be that. I do miss that aspect of fishing the Tean, which was very nice. And in fact, I was moved to try and give something back as well. You mentioned about Harry sort of keeping all ends up on his own, really, at the moment. Similarly, about 10, 12 years ago, they were really struggling with committee members, and I'd put myself forward to join the committee. And Mike Weaver, bless him, said, "No, Rob, it's too far for you. You can't keep coming to the meetings. No such thing as Zoom back then, but I was in Torquay and they were all meeting up at the Fingalbridge Inn or wherever. But no, I did feel closely associated, and it'll always have a place in my heart."
Did you get to fish many of the other rivers then? Because I know Roddy's bit that he used to have on the Exe, and I know we fished the Tamar, and I know I came over and saw you when you were fishing the Tor and the junction of the Little Dart one time. Was there anywhere else that had a special place for you in Devon?
I was a trout member of the Dart Angling Association, so that I could get some salmon fishing there. But I did okay on the sea trout front, but I didn't enjoy fishing there as much. So when the opportunity came for full membership and joining a queue to fish Totnes Weirpool, that wasn't for me. I didn't really want to do that sort of fishing. It felt a bit like combat fishing on the American, northeast rivers. But I've, like you say, we've the Fox was the first place I fished. Actually, thinking about it, because I got back into fishing probably in the early 90s, having done a lot as a kid. And the first place I went was the Fox and Hounds. And I went with a few mates and we stayed at the Fox. And it was Easter. It must have been about 92, 93. it was Easter, and the place was full of fishermen. It was absolutely full of fishermen. In fact, all of the beats were fishing 4 rods rather than 2 because everybody was there to fish. And I enjoyed it so much. That was probably April. I went back in May for a weekend and had a bit more fishing. And that's where I got the bug, actually, thinking about it, or the bug back again. And then had a few family holidays in Scotland. I caught my first salmon on the River Orr, and then ended up moving to Scotland, and the rest is history, as they say. But no, I fished the Tor, the Torridge, the Tamar, the Dart. I actually, there's the Yarm. You know the Yarm? Yeah. So Snowby used to, I think it's probably on the fish passport system now, but Snowby used to have a beat on the Yarm, Upper Yarm, I think it was called. And I fished there and had real success. I caught, it closes in December, and I had salmon in November, out of season sea trout by the bucket load. I mean, I'm not kidding you. I must have, every time I went, I must have just hit pods of sea trout. They're all, it was almost like, what do I do? I can't stop catching them. And they're all out of season. But they were all fresh as paint. I mean, they were bright silver fish of 2 or 3 pounds. But that was a tiny, tiny little river compared to even to the Tor or the Tean. But that was quite good fun. A few trips into Cornwall for the camel and the foy, but I didn't really take to that very much, and it's a bit far away. But you're always looking for an angle to fish late in the season, aren't you? Because they close in December as well. But no, the Tean was good to me. I enjoyed the Tor, and I used to love fishing at Ensley because it's just a beautiful place to be.
That's a very good mix there, and it's lovely to hear about the Fox and Hounds, which I'm there for breakfast tomorrow, actually. So,
lovely.
So, yeah, it was a fascinating one for us, as you know, and I got a bit of flack about it, but there just weren't, when we got going there, the salmon just weren't there, and you couldn't run a business being a salmon fishery. You just couldn't do it. But we could sell 7 days a week being a trout fishery, and it worked really, really well. And we had so many people, and mayfly time, there would be people in the car park, there'd be lots of people knocking around wanting to fish, wherever it may be. And it was lovely. And the original owner's daughter was there. I've actually, in the desk next to me, I've got an ashtray that she gave me for Fox and Hounds. And she said, my father would have approved of what you were doing. And I was really thrilled about that. But it was such fun, and I really enjoyed every second of that. But I wanted to move on just a little bit, because we've talked about Scotland, we've talked about Devon, but have you travelled further have you travelled overseas with a fly rod?
Do you know, I've been to Norway, but I didn't fish. And that was, I know, absolutely. And to be honest, I didn't even know what the river was. But it was just the most entrancing looking, with that lovely alpine water. You know, it's that kind of greeny blue, and lots of platforms along the sort of gorge areas to help the fishermen. And but no, I've never been. I don't have a great. I'd like to go. I've obviously listened to your guests on the podcast, and I'd love to go to Matt Hayes' place, because I think he'd be good to spend some time with. And other places like Alaska and BC and places like that. I'd love to just experience it. But I like there's places still in Scotland I haven't been. I've still got a big long wish list of Scottish rivers that I'd like to fish, and not just rivers but lochs. I'd like to do more loch fishing for salmon and sea trout. So I'm not very ambitious, really, am I?
That sounds all right. And as I often say, there's no place like home. There's no place like home.
Indeed.
Yeah. But you mentioned BC there, and does that mean that Steelhead have been on your radar, or you watch them from afar and have thought about them a little bit?
Yeah, I think just from the point of view of the sort of skills and the fishing seems to be transferable. I mean, it seems to be fairly, um, you know, same kit, different fly type thing. So probably something I'd take to, but also the landscape and the wildlife. I'm not quite sure I want to get as close to a bear as you did, but I'd love to experience that. I've been to the States, but only ever to cities. I've never been to the great outdoors, really. But I'd like to see North America, in the raw, as it were.
Yeah, there's nothing quite like it. There's nothing like a steelhead, and it's very. Have you thought about Patagonia, that neck of the woods? Have you lusted or read after
I,
fishing there?
you know what? The thing about Patagonia that puts me off is, first of all, it's really windy, apparently, but you'll probably tell me it isn't now. But it seems to be really windy. And the other thing, that the sea trout aren't as attractive as our sea trout. They just look different. But the culture, and again the landscape, I think would be really nice. But it's not as high up on my list as say somewhere like BC.
It's funny you should say that, because I thought the same, and I thought I go fishing because it's fun. And then I was very fortunate to go down there. We did some podcasts down there as well, but we had 100-kilometre-an-hour winds, but it was coming downstream.
Yeah,
It wasn't that difficult. And once you get into that mindset, then it's not such a problem. I think I get where you're coming from a sea trout point of view, but they're just brutally strong fish. Out of everything that I've been lucky enough to catch, they are absolutely amazing.
yeah,
Absolutely amazing. And I'm kind of thinking of them in the way that you said, rightly so, about transferable skills. It's kind of similar to salmon in that sense, yet there are some subtleties in fly patterns, etc. But it's a kind of a similar thing from that point of view. And you've got these huge, great trout as well. And I think I said that I just didn't want to do them the injustice when there's another one of £4 or £6. So I started calling those grills, so that it did them the justice. So there wasn't a disappointment when I called them. There never was, because they were so strong and they were so beautiful. But yeah, it's an amazing, amazing fish. So, but I think I'm settling with you on that front, that we've got so much to enjoy here. It's good to do it, isn't it?
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, now that I'm in Scotland, I'm sport for choice. It wouldn't stop me, if somebody said, "Do you want to go and spend a few nights at the Half Moon and do some fishing in Devon?" I'd jump at the chance. My eldest, Charlie, he went to university in Lancaster, so and he's a keen fisherman. So we fished on the Eden. He fished on the Loon, and that was good fun. I mean, the Eden's a proper river for trout and salmon, of course. So that was good fun. So no, I wouldn't just stay in a little bunker in the northeast of Scotland. But day to day, week to week, I'm quite literally spoilt for choice.
The question that you mentioned, the Eden there, and are you superstitious? Because the reason I asked that is that I fished the Eden once and I caught a spanking fresh salmon, and I'm frightened to fish it again in case my luck runs out. Are you superstitious as an angler?
Yeah, I used to be a sort of, this is the lucky fly type angler. So if I caught a fish on a fly, I would relentlessly fish with that fly, and of course, if I then lost it, I would be fairly gutted. But what I do now is, if I catch a fish with a fly, I retire the fly, and so I've got this sort of rather sparse shelf with all my retired flies. But no, other than that, I don't really have any sort of big superstitions. Not a sort of put which foot into the waders first type guy. I'm not like that.
Yeah, I watch footballers come on if there's been a substitution. They do weird and wonderful dances. I saw a guy rub his hand on the pitch and then rub his face with the hand on Sunday. I can't remember who it was now, which team it was, but that was quite strange. But I'm really funny about hats. And if I've got a stack of hats that have been worn 2 or 3 times, but they just didn't feel right.
Yeah.
So that I've just thought, well, I can't wear them or given them away, but not explained the background of it. I hope they've turned out to be a little bit more lucky. But I'm not a superstitious person. I was interested to hear you say about that, given your day job as well, that I would think superstition doesn't enter in quite the same way.
No, I don't have superstitions at work, or I don't pray before I do an operation. The patient may do, I don't.
Yeah, lucky scrubs. Yeah. Well, tell me something then. If you're going to, let's say you're going over to go and fish the Tay, so you've got a 2-hour drive. What do you like to do? Do you listen to music on the way over?
If I'm going to the Tay, I'll most certainly be with my wife Gemma, and we very rarely listen to anything at all. We just chat. So you'd probably have to get me going somewhere closer to home to catch me out on what I'd listen to. It varies at the moment. I've got so many podcasts to catch up with. I like listening to those. Go to work, I listen to the podcast. And I'm revisiting all the music from when I was a teenager, which is mainly heavy rock. So I listen to Deep Purple, AC/DC, Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath is a bit more of a you got to be in the right mood type music. But one of the things I enjoy about it, Pete, is that later in life I became a musician. So when I was in my 40s, I started playing the trumpet. And I'd never really, I'd played the clarinet and the violin at school, but I always hated it and didn't want to do it. Suddenly I was doing something I actually quite enjoyed. I started to read music and appreciate music. So now I listen to it. And to me, listening to Ritchie Blackmore is like listening to Miles Davis. It's improvisation. It's kind of musician's music. Whereas my dad used to say, turn that racket down. It's musician's music. So that's what I tend to listen to at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about, and again, I was having this conversation with a friend of mine just yesterday as well about music, and he said he was listening to The Clash. And we were talking about when we were younger, the music that we didn't give the time of day. And I think there was somebody I was talking to, you had your tribe of music that you listened to, and you didn't really look beyond it. And it's only when you get a little bit older that you reflect back on music and you think, actually, that was okay. So you're listening to your heavy rock now. Do you have like a guilty pleasure that you didn't listen to, that now subsequently that you think, actually, that was really good and I couldn't stand it when I was younger?
Yeah, no, totally. The sort of the other tribe, as it were, I now listen to it and think, oh, I really quite enjoy that music. And I suppose it's nostalgic as well, isn't it? Because you remember hearing it on the radio or Top of the Pops, whatever, and you think, although I told myself I hated it, I actually quite like it.
Yeah, absolutely. So are you going to give me a song? Which is the one? Is it going to be AC/DC? Is it going to be Deep Purple? Is it going to be Black Sabbath? Give me a song for the Fly Culture playlist.
Lazy by Deep Purple.
Fantastic.
There you go. That was straight off the cuff. I hadn't thought about that or anything. That's just come into my mind, and it's a good choice.
Good. Well, I'll write that one down, and that's going to go onto the list. Rob, it's been wonderful to catch up as always. I'm thrilled that you're enjoying life up there. You're enjoying the fishing. You've clearly brought the grills from the West Country up to Scotland with you as well. So
That's where they were.
yeah, congratulations on that. So I can only keep my fingers crossed that that continues. And it was fascinating talking to Charles Innes at the Half Moon, and he was sort of kind of saying, we have these cycles, bear with it. And so we never know. So as salmon anglers, we're optimistic, we remain optimistic, and we keep our fingers very tightly crossed. But do you have your socials and things that if people want to connect with you, if they want to find you?
So I'm on Instagram. It's Fish Red Salmon. Fish Red Salmon. It's a private account, but feel free to ask to hook up with me if it floats your boat. As I say, there's not too many pictures of fish, but that's where I am.
Fantastic. Well, Rob, it's been lovely to chat with you as always. I keep my fingers crossed for you for the coming season. I hope you don't get too tired out in spring and that the line is continually pulled for you. And it's been lovely to chat with you. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Fly Culture podcast today.
Well, thanks very much, Pete. And when you're up this way, do give me a shout and it'd be good to have a beer.
That would be fantastic. I'll keep you in touch with my movements because I may be around your neck of the woods in May. So I will let you know about that, but we'll speak about that off mic. But everyone, this has been another episode of the Fly Culture podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this story as well. Another fascinating one and a look into someone's passion for the fish that we love so much. So thank you so much for listening. And as ever, there'll be another episode of the Fly Culture podcast very, very soon.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly published magazine owned and run by fly anglers. When it comes to fly fishing, we've got you covered.